I had perfected the art of being a ghost. In the 6 months since Mara had walked out, taking with her the color and sound and half the books from our shared shelves, I had learned to move through the world without leaving a trace. I was a vessel of quiet observation, a professional nodder, a recorder of other people's lives, because my own had been hollowed out. My editor, bless his deadline-driven heart, called it focused professionalism. I called it survival. Being a ghost meant you couldn't be hurt again. Ghosts don't have hearts to break. This assignment was supposed to be the pinnacle of that ghostly existence. An interview with Julianne Vance. The Julianne Vance. The monolithic reclusive author whose novels had been my companions through college, through my coming out, through the dizzying highs and crushing lows of my 20s. She hadn't granted an in-person interview in over a decade. Her books were brutal, beautiful things, full of women who loved and fought and bled with the force of a tidal wave. They were everything I wasn't anymore. Alive. The drive up the coast was a pathetic metaphor for my mood. The sky was a bruised purple gray, spitting a relentless, chilling rain that slicked the asphalt of the winding two-lane highway. The ocean to my left was a churning, furious mess of white-capped waves crashing against jagged black rocks. My GPS had lost signal 20 minutes ago, and I was navigating by a set of increasingly cryptic directions, printed on a sheet of paper that was now damp from the leak in my car's passenger side door. Turn left at the fallen cypress. Follow the gravel road until you question your life choices. Her gate is the one that looks like it wants to be left alone. The gravel road was more of a muddy suggestion, a path carved between monolithic pines that clawed at the sky and dripped incessantly onto my windshield. The wipers fought a losing battle. With every turn, the world grew quieter, the sounds of civilization replaced by the drumming of rain and the groaning of ancient trees. I did, in fact, question my life choices. I questioned the journalism degree, the move to the city, the decision to love a woman who saw commitment as a cage. Most of all, I questioned why I'd thought I, the ghost, was equipped to face a woman who wrote about life with such visceral, terrifying honesty. Finally, I saw it. The gate wasn't just unwelcoming. It was a declaration of war on the outside world. Forged iron, black and severe, with no name, no number, just a stark, imposing presence. It swung open silently as my car approached, a spectral invitation into the fortress. The driveway beyond was long, curving through a landscape that was more tamed wilderness than garden. Moss clung to everything, thick and green as velvet. The house came into view slowly. A creature of stone and dark wood hunkered down against the hill, its windows like watchful eyes staring out at the angry sea. It was magnificent and intimidating, exactly like her prose. I parked my sensible, dented sedan next to a formidable-looking black truck that was splattered with mud. For a moment, I just sat there, the engine ticking, my heart doing a frantic, traitorous rhythm against my ribs. You are a professional, Alara. You are a ghost. Go in, get the quotes, get out. I repeated it like a mantra, my breath fogging the cold glass. Taking a deep, shaky breath, I grabbed my satchel with my recorder and notebook, threw my raincoat on, and made a dash for the heavy oak door. There was no bell, only a large iron knocker in the shape of a raven. I lifted it, the metal shockingly cold against my skin, and let it fall. The sound was a deep, resonant thud that seemed to be swallowed by the house itself. Silence. The rain dripped from the eaves. I was about to knock again when the door swung inward. And there she was. Julianne Vance was not what I expected. The few existing photos of her were a decade old, showing a woman with sharp, severe features and an almost pained intensity. The woman in the doorway was softer, though no less intense. She was tall, with broad shoulders under a simple gray cashmere sweater. Her dark hair was shot through with silver, pulled back into a loose, messy knot at the nape of her neck. with rebellious strands framing a face that was a study in contradictions. High cheekbones and a strong jawline spoke of strength, but her mouth was fuller than in the photos, and there were fine lines around her eyes the color of moss and storm clouds that seemed to see entirely too much. She smelled of wood smoke, old paper, and something else, something clean and sharp like ozone after a lightning strike. It was a scent that felt like a secret. "You're late," she said. Her voice was lower than I'd imagined, a gravelly alto that resonated in my chest. It wasn't an accusation, just a statement of fact. "The road, the directions," I stammered, feeling my carefully constructed professionalism dissolving in the rain. She gave a small, humorless smile. "They're designed to discourage the uncommitted." She stepped back, holding the door open. "Get in before you drown." I stepped over the threshold, and the world shifted. The roar of the storm outside was instantly muted, replaced by a profound, weighted silence. The air inside was warm and carried that intoxicating scent. The entryway was cavernous, with a slate floor and walls lined floor to ceiling with books, not just in shelves, but in stacks on the floor, on tables, on every available surface. It was a beautiful, glorious fire hazard. It was heaven. "I'm Alara," I said, extending a hand, then realizing it was damp and cold. I let it drop awkwardly. "I know who you are," Julianne said, her gaze sweeping over me once, quick and comprehensive. It felt less like a greeting and more like an assessment. She didn't offer her own hand. Instead, she gestured down a wide hallway. "My study is this way. Let's get this over with." My ghostly facade was already cracking. I wasn't just observing, I was being seen. And the woman seeing me was the one who wrote the books that had mapped the geography of my own heart. This was not going to be easy. The study was even more overwhelming than the entryway. One entire wall was a single pane of glass, looking out onto the raging storm and the tumultuous sea. The other walls were, predictably, covered in books. A massive desk of dark-scarred wood sat before the window, cluttered with papers, open volumes, and a half-empty mug of what I assumed was tea. A fire crackled in a large stone fireplace, casting a warm, flickering light over the room and throwing dancing shadows on Julianne's face as she moved to stand before it. She didn't invite me to sit. "You have 90 minutes, she said, turning to face me, her arms crossed over her chest. The firelight caught the silver in her hair, making it gleam. "Your editor was very persuasive. I trust you'll make it worth my while." I felt a prickle of annoyance cut through my intimidation. I wasn't some starstruck fan. I was a journalist. I straightened my shoulders, pulling my recorder and notebook from my bag. "I intend to, Ms. Vance." "Julianne," she corrected, her tone flat. "Formality is tedious." "Julianne," I repeated, the name feeling foreign and heavy on my tongue. I placed the recorder on a small clear space on the corner of her desk and took one of the two worn leather armchairs that faced the fireplace. I clicked my pen. "Your last novel, The Salt Eaters, deals with themes of inherited trauma and exile. Many critics have noted the shift from the more internal, psychological landscapes of your earlier work to a broader, almost epic scope. Was that a conscious evolution?" It was a solid, standard opening question. Safe. Professional. Julianne watched me for a long moment, her moss-green eyes unblinking. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the howl of the wind outside. I could feel a flush creeping up my neck. I was used to difficult subjects, but this was different. This was a deliberate, tactical silence. Finally, she spoke. "Critics say many things. They build little boxes for ideas to keep them tidy. My work is not tidy." "So the shift wasn't intentional?" I pressed, trying to keep my voice steady. Everything is intentional, she countered, a ghost of a smile playing on her lips. But not everything is planned. A story has its own gravity. It pulls in what it needs. You don't tell the story, it tells you. You're just the vessel. Her gaze was so direct it felt like a physical touch. I scribbled a note, more to have something to do with my hands than to record her words, which were already burning themselves into my memory. That sounds very passive. Your characters are anything but passive. They're fighters. They're forces of nature. Are they? She tilted her head, a gesture that was both curious and challenging. Or are they just reacting to the world that's been built around them? There's a difference between fighting and flailing. Most people spend their lives flailing. The words landed like a well-aimed stone, striking a little too close to the hollow space inside me. I thought of the past 6 months, of my quiet, empty apartment, of the careful, boring routine I'd built to keep myself from feeling anything at all. Flailing. In your books, I said, pivoting, my voice a little tighter than I wanted, the women who love each other, their relationships are often fraught with danger, with external threats that force them together or tear them apart. Do you believe love between women requires that kind of crucible to be authentic? I hadn't planned to go there so quickly, but her dismissiveness had gotten under my skin. I wanted to see if I could get a reaction, a real one. I did. For the first time, a flicker of something other than cool assessment crossed her face. It was a shadow of an old pain, there and gone in a second. Her posture stiffened almost imperceptibly. I believe love is a crucible period, she said, her voice dropping a fraction, losing its earlier rhetorical edge. The world is a threat. Loving anyone, truly loving them, is an act of defiance against that threat. The specifics of gender are just scenery. It was a brilliant deflection, both an answer and a complete evasion. She was giving me sound bites, perfect, polished quotes that said everything and nothing. I felt a surge of frustration. I hadn't driven 3 hours through a tempest to be fed a curated collection of authorial aphorisms. But the scenery matters, doesn't it? I pushed back, my own defiance surprising me. The scenery is what makes it a story. Two women loving each other in a world that is, at best, indifferent, and at worst, hostile. That's a different story than any other. The corner of her mouth twitched. Are you asking me a question about my work, Alara? Or are you telling me about your life? The question hung in the air, sharp and glittering and cruel. My breath hitched, my professionalism, my ghostly armor, it all shattered at once. I felt exposed, pinned by her perception. The interview, my one job, was slipping through my fingers. I was flailing. I'm asking, I said, my voice barely a whisper, why the women in your books who find happiness together always seem to find it at the edge of the world, in isolation, as if it can't exist anywhere else. Before she could answer, the lights in the study flickered once, twice, and then died. The room was plunged into a thick, profound darkness, broken only by the frantic dancing light from the fireplace. Simultaneously, the howl of the wind outside escalated into a deafening shriek, and a sheet of rain hit the plate glass window with the force of a thrown bucket of gravel. The fire in the hearth recoiled, sputtering and hissing. The silence in the room was absolute. My recorder was still on, its tiny red light a lonely beacon on her desk. Well, Julianne's voice came out of the darkness, dry and devoid of any panic. It seems you've brought the storm with you. The power was well and truly out. My phone had no signal. The 90 minutes she had allotted me had passed in the tense volley of questions and deflections, and now I was a prisoner of the very isolation I had just been questioning her about. There's a generator, she said, her voice now closer. I heard the soft scuff of her shoes on the wood floor. But it only powers the well pump and the freezer. Not much use for anything else. I could see her silhouette moving in the firelight, a tall, graceful shadow. She was retrieving a set of candles from a wooden chest near the hearth, her movements economical and sure. There was no trace of alarm in her demeanor. She was as at home in the dark as she was in the light. I, on the other hand, felt a familiar knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. I was out of my depth, in every conceivable way. I should probably see if the road is passable, I said, my voice sounding thin and reedy. Julianne paused in lighting the first candle, the match flaring to life and illuminating her face in a brief dramatic flash. Her expression was unreadable. The bridge over the creek a mile back will be flooded. It always is in a storm this bad. You're not going anywhere tonight. The finality of her statement landed with the weight of a dropped stone. Trapped. I was trapped here, with this woman who saw through me, in a house that felt like a world unto itself. The ghost was being forced to haunt a very specific, very small space. I don't have anything, I said, the words coming out before I could stop them. A change of clothes, a toothbrush. My carefully maintained control was fraying, revealing the panicked, unprepared person underneath. She finished lighting a candelabra and placed it on the mantelpiece, its soft glow pushing back the shadows. I have guest rooms, and I'm sure I can find you a toothbrush. I'm a recluse, not a savage. There was a sliver of dry humor in her tone, the first I'd heard. She turned to face me, her features softened by the candlelight. You look terrified. It's just a power outage, not the end of the world. Right? Sorry. I rubbed my hands on my damp jeans. This wasn't on the agenda. Life rarely is, she said. She picked up another candle and walked towards her desk. As she passed me, her arm brushed against my shoulder. It was the barest of contacts. Cashmere against my thin cotton shirt. But a jolt went through. Me, sharp and electric. It was warmth. It was presence. It was the opposite of being a ghost. I flinched. A small, involuntary jerk. She stopped. Are you all right? Fine, just cold. I lied, my heart hammering against my ribs. She didn't call me on the lie, though I had the distinct feeling she saw it for what it was. She simply nodded and continued to her desk, lighting the candle and placing it near my recorder. The tiny red light blinked back, a faithful, silent witness. The interview, I suppose, is over, she said, looking not at me, but at the recorder. I guess so, I replied, feeling a strange mix of relief and disappointment. She was quiet for a moment, watching the flame waver in a draft. You asked me why happiness in my books only seems to exist in isolation. I held my breath. Maybe, she said softly, her back still to me. It's not about isolation. Maybe it's about finding the one place, the one person, with whom you don't have to fight anymore, where you can stop flailing. She turned her head, her eyes finding mine across the flickering room. And maybe those places are just hard to find. The storm raged outside, but in the quiet, candlelit study, a different kind of tempest was beginning to stir. And I was standing directly in its path. My carefully constructed walls were nothing against this. They were sandcastles against a rising tide. The next few hours passed in a strange, suspended reality. The storm didn't let up. If anything, it intensified, the wind shrieking around the corners of the house like a banshee. Julianne moved with a quiet competence that was both calming and deeply intimidating. She built up the fire, found a bottle of whiskey and 2 heavy crystal glasses, and located a stash of crackers and a block of sharp cheddar cheese. It was a ridiculously domestic scene, set against a backdrop of elemental fury. We sat in the 2 leather armchairs, pulled closer to the hearth, the makeshift meal on a small wooden stool between us. The whiskey was smoky and smooth, and it sent a welcome warmth through my chilled body. For a long time, we didn't speak. The questions of the interview felt like they belonged to another lifetime. I was no longer a journalist, and she was no longer a subject. We were just two women, trapped in a stone house, listening to a storm. I watched her as she stared into the flames. The firelight carved shadows and highlights onto her face, making her look both older and younger at the same time. I noticed things I hadn't in the formal setting of the interview. A small faded scar that bisected her left eyebrow. The way she held her glass. Her long fingers wrapped around it as if for warmth. The slight unconscious frown of concentration on her face as she watched the log settle. She was captivating in her stillness. My reporter's instinct for observation had been usurped by something far more personal, something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a very long time. An acute, unnerving awareness of another woman. "You never answered my question," I said, my voice softer now, loosened by the whiskey and the strange intimacy of the situation. She didn't look at me. "Which one?" "You asked so many." "About whether I was asking about your books or my life." A slow smile touched her lips. "Does it matter? A good question always reveals more about the asker than the answer reveals about the subject." She finally turned her gaze from the fire to me, and the full force of her attention was like a physical weight. "So, Alara, what did your question reveal about you?" My throat went dry. This was her arena. She dealt in truth in the messy, painful core of human experience. I was a tourist here. "It revealed," I started, my voice careful, "that I'm tired of the edge of the world." The admission hung in the air between us, fragile and terrifyingly honest. It was the truest thing I'd said all day. Julianne held my gaze for a long moment, her own expression softening. The formidable author receded, and for a second, I saw just a woman who understood what it meant to be tired. "Most of us are," she said quietly. In the ensuing silence, I did something clumsy. Reaching for my glass on the stool, my hand shook slightly, and I knocked over the half-empty bottle of whiskey. It clattered against the stone hearth, not breaking, but spilling a dark, fragrant pool onto the slate. "Shit, I'm so sorry," I gasped, lunging forward to grab it. In my haste, my hand slipped on the smooth stone, and I braced myself against the sharp corner of the hearth. A hot, searing pain shot up my palm. I pulled my hand back with a hiss. A dark line of blood was already welling up from a deep gash across the fleshy part of my palm. It dripped, a single shockingly red drop, onto the gray slate next to the spilled whiskey. "Damn it," I muttered, clutching my hand to my chest, feeling stupid and clumsy and utterly mortified. "Stay still," Julianne commanded. Her voice was sharp, but not with anger. It was the voice of someone taking charge. She was on her feet in an instant, disappearing into the shadows of the room and returning a moment later with a kitchen towel. She knelt in front of me, taking my uninjured hand gently. "Let me see." Hesitantly, I uncurled my fingers. The cut was deeper than I'd thought, bleeding sluggishly. The sight of it made me feel a little faint. "It's not so bad," she said, her voice a low murmur. Her proximity was overwhelming. I could smell the ozone and paper scent of her, now mingled with the smoky aroma of the whiskey. She gently blotted the blood away with the towel, her touch surprisingly delicate. Her fingers were cool against my skin. "But it needs to be cleaned properly. The kitchen has a first aid kit. Can you stand?" I nodded, feeling like a child. She helped me to my feet, her hand briefly resting on my arm to steady me. The warmth of her touch lingered long after she'd let go. I followed her through the dark, cavernous house, her single candle our only guide. The shadows danced and leaped around us. transforming the endless stacks of books into looming, monstrous shapes. The kitchen was a vast, professional-looking space, all stainless steel and dark stone countertops, now rendered eerie and strange in the candlelight. She sat me down on a stool and ran the water at the sink. It came out in a sputtering, weak stream from the generator-powered pump. "This will sting," she warned, before gently taking my hand and holding it under the cool water. It did sting, and I flinched, but her grip on my wrist was firm and steady. She was so close, I could feel the warmth radiating from her body. I found myself staring at the top of her head as she focused on my hand, at the intricate weave of silver and dark strands in her hair. I wanted, with a sudden, shocking intensity, to reach out and touch it. After she'd cleaned the wound, she dried it with a clean cloth, her movements efficient and tender. The juxtaposition was dizzying. She retrieved a well-stocked first aid kit from a drawer and began expertly applying antiseptic and a bandage. Her head was still bent in concentration, and a few loose strands of her hair fell forward, brushing against my arm. Every nerve ending in my body went on high alert. "You're a disaster," she said, her voice soft and laced with an amusement that held no malice. "Comes with the territory," I mumbled, my gaze fixed on her long, capable fingers as they wrapped the gauze around my palm. Her hands were a writer's hands, I thought nonsensically. Strong, practical, but with an underlying grace. Hands that could build a world, and then bandage a wound in it. "What territory is that?" she asked, not looking up. "Ghosts. We're not very good with solid objects." She finished her work, securing the bandage with a piece of tape. She didn't let go of my hand immediately. Her thumb brushed gently over my knuckles, a fleeting, almost unconscious gesture. My breath caught in my throat. "Maybe you're not a ghost, Ilara," she said, her voice a low murmur. She finally lifted her head, and her eyes, just inches from mine, were dark and deep in the candlelight. "Maybe you're just someone who's been haunted." The distinction was everything. A ghost is empty. A haunted person is full of something, even if that something is pain. The moment stretched, thick with unspoken things. The storm outside, my bleeding hand, the interview. It all fell away. There was only the small, flickering circle of light, the scent of antiseptic and whiskey, and the startling, unnerving warmth of her hand holding mine. I had the distinct feeling that if I didn't move, didn't breathe, I might stay in this moment forever. And the most terrifying part was, I wanted to. I wanted it more than I had wanted anything in a very long time. She was the one who broke the spell. She gently released my hand and stood up, the space between us suddenly feeling cold. "There. Good as new." Her voice was a little rougher than before. "We should get some sleep. The storm will likely pass by morning." Sleep. The idea seemed preposterous. My mind was a chaotic jumble of adrenaline, whiskey, and the lingering sensation of her touch. "I have a guest room made up," she said, already moving towards the door, candle in hand. "This way." I followed her up a wide, creaking staircase to the second floor. The guest room was simple but beautiful, dominated by a large bed with a thick white duvet and a mountain of pillows. An old, faded Persian rug covered the dark wood floor. Through the window, lightning briefly illuminated the thrashing branches of a tree. "The bathroom is through there," she said, gesturing to a door. "There should be a new toothbrush in the cabinet and—" She hesitated, then shrugged off her gray cashmere sweater. "Here, your clothes are damp. This will be warm." She held it out to me. It was an offering, an act of profound, startling kindness. I took it, my fingers brushing against hers. The cashmere was impossibly soft and radiated her body heat. It still carried her scent. Wood smoke, paper, ozone. "Thank you," I whispered. The words felt entirely inadequate. "It's just a sweater," she said, though we both knew it was more than that. She lingered in the doorway for a second, her expression unreadable in the flickering light. "Sleep well, Ilara." Then she was gone, leaving me alone in the quiet room with the storm raging outside, and her sweater clutched in my hand like a lifeline. I stood there for a long time, pressing the soft wool to my face and breathing in her scent. I wasn't a ghost anymore. I was a haunted woman in a stranger's house wearing her sweater, and every inch of my body was thrumming with a terrifying, exhilarating, and deeply unwanted life. I didn't sleep much. I lay in the enormous, comfortable bed, listening to the storm and the foreign sounds of the house. I was acutely aware of Julianne sleeping somewhere down the hall. My bandaged hand throbbed in time with my heartbeat. I had come here to perform a function, to be a conduit for her story, but the storm had inverted everything. Now I was a character in hers, an unexpected plot twist. The sweater was a torment. I had pulled it on after a lukewarm, generator-powered shower, and it enveloped me. It was too big, the sleeves falling over my hands, the hem reaching my mid-thighs. It felt like an embrace. Every time I moved, I was surrounded by her scent, a constant, intimate reminder of her presence. It was maddening. It was comforting. It was the most dangerous thing I had done in years. My mind kept replaying our conversation. By the fire. Maybe it's about finding the one place, the one person, with whom you don't have to fight anymore. The words echoed, resonating with a truth I hadn't wanted to face. My relationship with Mara had been a fight, a constant, exhausting battle of wills, of needs, of expectations. I had fought to be seen, fought to be enough, and in the end, I had lost. I had retreated into my ghostly existence because I was quite simply too tired to fight anymore. And then here was Julianne, a woman who seemed to see me without any effort at all, who saw the flailing, the fear, the exhaustion, and hadn't run away. Instead, she had cleaned my wound and given me her sweater. Sometime in the deep, dark hours of the morning, the wind began to die down, its shriek softening to a low moan. The rain eased to a steady rhythmic drumming on the roof. I must have drifted off, because I was startled awake by a soft knock on the door. I sat bolt upright, my heart pounding. The room was still dark, but a faint gray light was beginning to filter through the window. "Ilara?" Julianne's voice was low, just on the other side of the door. "I'm awake," I called out, my own voice thick with sleep. The door creaked open. She stood in the doorway, a silhouette against the dim light of the hallway. She was holding 2 mugs. "I made coffee," she said, "on the gas stove, one of the few analog pleasures left to me." She walked into the room and handed me one of the mugs. The warmth seeped into my cold hands, and the rich, dark aroma filled the air. "Thank you," I said, taking a sip. It was strong and black and perfect. She didn't leave. Instead, she walked over to the window and stood looking out at the dawn. The storm had broken. The sky was a wash of soft gray and pale pink, the clouds shredded and retreating. The sea was still rough, but the fury was gone, replaced by a deep, rolling swell. "It's over," she said, more to herself than to me. I sat on the edge of the bed, clutching the warm mug, intensely aware of her sweater on my body, of her standing just a few feet away. The quiet of the morning felt more intimate, more charged than the drama of the storm. "I read your file," she said, her back still to me. "My file?" "The one your editor sent over. Your portfolio. The pieces you've written." She turned from the window, leaning her shoulder against the frame. Her face was cast in the soft morning light, and she looked tired, but the intensity in her eyes was undiminished. "Your article on the seed bank in Svalbard was good, thorough, but the one that caught my attention was the personal essay. About the closing of the last lesbian bar in your old neighborhood. My blood ran cold. That piece was from 2 years ago. It was a raw, angry, heartbroken piece of writing I'd published in a small online journal under a pseudonym. I had never included it in my professional portfolio. My editor must have dug it up. It was unusually passionate for a ghost, she said, her voice gentle. I couldn't speak. I felt stripped bare. She had seen the part of me I kept most hidden, the part that had loved and lost and mourned not just a person, but a place, a community, the part of me that was unequivocally, painfully queer. That's why I said yes to the interview, she continued, her gaze unwavering. I was curious about the woman who could write with that much fire and then try so hard to extinguish it. I looked down into my coffee cup, at my own reflection, distorted and dark. The fire burns you out, I said, the words barely audible. Only if you try to contain it, she replied. It's meant to be shared. For warmth. She pushed off from the window frame and walked over to the bed. She sat down on the edge, a careful foot of space between us. But it might as well have been a millimeter. The mattress dipped with her weight. I could feel the heat of her body. My career, she began, her voice low and confessional, was built on a story I didn't want to tell. My first book, the one that made my name. It was about a woman I loved, a woman who left me. I wrote it out of spite and grief, and the world called it art. They consumed my heartbreak and they asked for more? I looked up at her, shocked. Her public persona was so fiercely private. I had never heard even a rumor about her personal life. I gave them more stories, she said, a bitter twist to her mouth. But I kept the heart of it for myself. I built this house, this fortress, to protect it, to have a place where I didn't have to perform my own pain for an audience. She looked at me, and her eyes were filled with a profound, weary understanding. I know what it's like to be tired of the fight, Alara, and I know what it's like to try and turn yourself into a ghost to survive. My carefully constructed dam of self-control finally broke. A single hot tear escaped and traced a path down my cheek. I didn't bother to wipe it away. Her name was Mara, I whispered. The name felt like a shard of glass in my throat. She said I loved too much, that it was suffocating. Julianne's expression softened into something achingly tender. Some people are afraid of the deep end, she said. They prefer the shallows. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with the ocean. She reached out, not to my hand this time, but to my face. Her thumb gently wiped away my tear. The gesture so intimate, so unexpected. It made my breath catch. Her skin was warm. Her touch was a question. I didn't pull away. I leaned into her touch, a small, almost imperceptible movement. It was a surrender, a confession, a plea. Her eyes searched mine, and I saw a universe of things in them. Recognition, yearning, and a deep, resonant loneliness that mirrored my own. The space between us collapsed. The air grew thick, heavy with everything that hadn't been said. I saw her gaze drop to my mouth, and my own gaze drop to hers. This was it, the precipice, the moment before the wave breaks. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. This is insane, a small, panicked part of my brain screamed. She's your subject, you're in her house. This is a mistake. But the rest of me, the part that had been dormant for so long, the part that recognized the truth in her words and the safety in her gaze, didn't care. It was tired of being careful. It was tired of being a ghost. I saw the decision in her eyes a second before it happened. A subtle shift, a darkening. And then she was leaning in, slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull away. I didn't. I met her halfway. Her lips were soft, hesitant at first, a gentle question. And then, as I responded, as I let out a shaky breath and kissed her back, The tentative pressure deepened. It wasn't a kiss of wild passion, not the fiery explosion I might have written about. It was a kiss of profound, staggering relief. It was the end of a long, cold winter. It was the feeling of coming home to a place you didn't even know you were searching for. My hands came up to cup her face, my fingers tangling in the soft hair at her temples. Her hands found my waist, pulling me closer, until there was no space left between us at all. The coffee mug I was holding tilted and fell, spilling onto the duvet, but neither of us noticed. The scent of coffee mingled with the scent of her, of wood smoke and paper and rain. The kiss deepened, becoming more than just a confirmation. It became a conversation, a story. In it, I could feel her loneliness, her years of guarded solitude, and she, I think, could feel my exhaustion, my carefully banked grief. We were two haunted people, finding a sanctuary in each other. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. She rested her forehead against mine, her eyes closed. Her hands were still warm on my waist, holding me steady. "Oh," was all I could manage to say, my voice a ragged whisper. A slow smile spread across her face, a genuine, unguarded smile that transformed her features, making her look years younger. "Oh," she agreed, her voice thick with emotion. She opened her eyes, her moss-green irises dark and luminous. "So much for formality." Just then, a faint hum started up from downstairs, and the lamp on the bedside table flickered to life, casting a steady golden glow over the room. The power was back on. The real world was waiting. But for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel the urge to run back to it. The light seemed to break the spell, but not the connection. We pulled back, a little shy in the sudden brightness. The spilled coffee on the duvet was a dark, spreading stain. "I'll get that," Julianne said, her voice returning to something closer to its normal register. Though, a new warmth lingered in it. "No, I'm sorry, it was my fault," I said, starting to get up. She put a hand on my arm, stopping me. "Alara, it's fine, it's just a duvet." Her eyes met mine, and there was a gentle humor in them. "I have others. It turns out recluses accumulate a lot of linen." I laughed, a real, genuine laugh that felt rusty from disuse. The sound surprised me. It felt good. The morning unfolded in a series of quiet domestic moments that felt both surreal and perfectly natural. We stripped the bed together, our hands brushing, sending little zings of electricity through me each time. She found me a clean t-shirt and a pair of sweatpants that were ridiculously long but wonderfully comfortable. We went downstairs and made a proper breakfast of scrambled eggs and toast, moving around her large kitchen in an easy, unspoken rhythm. The journalist in me was screaming. My recorder was still on her desk. My notebook was filled with half-finished, pretentious questions. My editor was expecting a story. But the woman in me, the one who had been asleep for so long, was finally blessedly awake, and she didn't give a damn about any of it. We ate at a small table in a breakfast nook that overlooked the now calm sea. The sun was breaking through the clouds, glinting off the wet leaves of the trees, and turning the surface of the water to hammered silver. "So," I said, after a few minutes of comfortable silence, "what happens now?" It was a loaded question. I was a journalist who had just slept with her subject. The power dynamic was a minefield. The ethics were a disaster. Julianne put down her fork and looked at me, her expression serious. "Now, you finish your breakfast. Then you'll call a tow truck for your car, which I suspect is stuck in the mud. And I," she said, her voice firm, "will call your editor." My stomach dropped. "What are you going to tell him?" "I'm going to tell him that I was an impossible, cantankerous old bat," she said, a twinkle in her eye. "That the interview was a complete failure, that you couldn't get a single usable quote out of me, and that the story is dead. I will take the full blame. Your professional reputation will be intact." I stared at her. It was a concrete plan, an act of protection. She was building a wall, not to keep me out, but to shield me. You would do that? I already told you, she said, her voice softening. I'm tired of fighting, and I have no intention of letting you walk into a battle on my behalf. She reached across the table and took my bandaged hand, her fingers wrapping around mine. The story of Julianne Vance, the reclusive author, is over. I'm not interested in it anymore. Her thumb caressed my knuckles, and my heart did a slow, painful flip. What story are you interested in? I whispered. Her smile was slow and full of a quiet, breathtaking hope. Ours, she said. I think it's just beginning. The phone call with my sister Chloe came later that afternoon as I was waiting for the tow truck. I'd found a single miraculous bar of service by the window in the study. Alara, thank God. I was about to report you missing. A reclusive author in a storm? It sounds like the beginning of a horror movie. I'm fine, Chloe. The power was out. Well, you missed Sunday dinner. Mom made brisket. And guess who was there? Mark? From my office? He was asking about you. I closed my eyes. Mark from her office was Chloe's latest attempt to fix me. He was, by all accounts, a nice, stable, heterosexual man. He was everything I didn't want. That's nice, I said, my voice flat. Nice? Alara, you have to get back out there. It's been 6 months. Mara's not coming back. You can't just hide in your apartment and interview weirdos forever. You need to move on. Find a nice guy. Every word was a small, sharp jab. The familiar pressure to be normal, to be fixed, to erase the part of me that loved women and pretend it was just a phase. I looked around Julianne's study, at the comforting chaos of her books, at the empty whiskey glass still on the mantelpiece, at the space where we had sat by the fire. This place, which should have been weird and isolating, felt more like home than my own apartment. I have to go, Chloe, I said, my voice shaking slightly. Are you crying? Oh, honey, don't be upset. I just want you to be happy. I know, I said. And the terrible thing was I knew she meant it. Her version of my happiness just had no room for the real me. I'll call you later. I hung up before she could reply, my hand trembling. I felt the familiar sting of tears, the old weary ache of being misunderstood. A moment later, Julianne appeared in the doorway, a question in her eyes. She must have seen my face. Family? She asked softly. I just nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. She came and stood in front of me, her presence a solid, comforting warmth. She didn't say, "It'll be okay." She didn't offer platitudes. She just looked at me with that unnerving perception and said, "You don't have to carry that in here." And that was it. That was everything. The permission to set it down. The tears I'd been holding back spilled over. I didn't sob, but they tracked silently down my face. I was so tired of carrying it all. The grief for Mara, the pressure from my family, the fear that I was fundamentally broken. I can't do this again, I whispered, the words torn from the deepest part of me. Do what? She asked, her voice a low murmur. My gaze flickered from her eyes to her mouth and back again. The confession was a torrent, waiting to be unleashed. This, I said, my voice cracking. Feeling this? For someone. For another woman. The last time. It broke me. I can't survive that again. I had finally said it. The truth of my terror. Not just of love, but of this specific, beautiful, terrifying love. I waited for her to recoil, to put up her walls, to dismiss me as damaged goods. Instead, she reached out and cupped my face in her hands, her thumbs brushing away my tears. Her eyes were fierce with an emotion I couldn't name. Elara, she said, her voice raw. Look at me. I am not her. The simple, powerful truth of it struck me to the core. I'm not the shallows, I'm the ocean, and I'm not afraid of the deep end. I live there. She searched my eyes, a silent, desperate question in her own. I felt it the moment you stepped out of your car, she confessed, her voice dropping to a whisper. This pull, the difficult interview, the walls, that was for me, not you. I was terrified. I haven't felt anything like this in 20 years. Her honesty was a gut punch. She had been just as scared as I was. Don't you see? She whispered, her forehead touching mine. You didn't bring the storm. You were the calm in the middle of it. For me. And then she kissed me again. Not the gentle, questioning kiss of the morning, but a kiss of desperate, profound certainty. It was a promise. It was a plea. It was two solitudes, reaching for each other across a vast and lonely sea. It was the beginning of our story. The tow truck driver, a cheerful man named Gary, finally arrived and winched my car out of the mud with practiced ease. The sun was low in the sky, painting the clouds in strokes of orange and gold. It was time to go. Packing my satchel felt strange. The recorder, the notebook, they seemed like artifacts from another life. Julianne stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, watching me. She was wearing a different sweater, a dark blue one this time, but I was still wearing her sweatpants. You can keep the sweater, she said as if reading my mind. The gray one. I started, not knowing what to say. Thank you for everything. It was my pleasure, she said, and the sincerity in her voice made my chest ache. We walked out to my car together. The air was cool and clean, smelling of wet earth and salt. The world felt new. So, I said, leaning against my car door, delaying the inevitable. The story's dead. The magazine story is, she corrected. She stepped closer, into my space, and the world narrowed to just her. But the other one, the one we're writing, it's going to need some revisions. And a lot of research. A smile played on her lips. Come back this weekend, she said. It wasn't a question. Not as a journalist, just as a Lara. My heart soared. I will, I promised. She leaned in and gave me one last soft kiss. It was brief, but it held the weight of everything that had happened and everything that was to come. Drive safe, she whispered, against my lips. As I drove back down the winding gravel road, away from the stone house and the woman who lived there, I didn't feel like I was leaving. I felt like I was finally on my way somewhere. The sky was clear, and the ocean to my right was a calm, glittering expanse of blue. I glanced at the passenger seat, where her gray cashmere sweater lay folded. A tangible promise. I had arrived as a ghost, a hollowed-out observer, convinced that the safest way to live was to not feel at all. But a storm, a cut hand, and a woman who saw through all my defenses had changed everything. She hadn't fixed me. She had simply shown me that I wasn't broken. I wasn't a ghost. I was a haunted house full of memories and fear, but ready finally to let someone new inside. I was driving back towards my life, but for the first time it felt like I was heading home. When you've spent so long believing love will destroy you, how do you trust the one person who makes you feel like you could finally be rebuilt? If you've ever found an unexpected sanctuary, let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to like this story and subscribe for more.